The Yadaran's tentacles quivered in fear as the planetary bombardment began, their watery world boiling like a lobster pot under the Zorgon onslaught. Humanity was their last hope. Vincent Grant sloshed through the steam-filled streets of the Yadaran capital, the metallic tang of vaporized seawater burning his nostrils. Desperate refugees clogged the boulevards, dragging their possessions on makeshift rafts as they sought higher ground. The cacophony of alarms and screams formed a hellish soundtrack, occasionally punctuated by the deep thrum of orbital strikes. Vincent gripped his rifle tighter, his knuckles pale against the carbon fiber stock. Pushing through the throng, he scanned for the seedy portside bar where his contact waited. The place was a dive, lit by flickering neon signs, advertising cheap booze and cheaper companionship. A wounded Yadaran lay propped against the wall, his blue blood seeping into overflowing gutters. Inside, Vincent found Korvac hunched over a bottle, his mottled green skin crisscrossed with old scars. The warrior looked up, his eye stalks twitching. "You're late, human," Korvac gurgled. "The Zorgons are already here." "Looks like you should have hired me sooner," Vincent said, sliding into the booth. "What's the job?" Korvac leaned in, his gills flaring. "We're losing this war. The Zorgons outnumber and outgun us on every front. Our only hope is a bioweapon our scientists developed, but we can't deliver it past their defenses." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, you want me to play mailman?" "We need someone with experience, someone willing to get their hands dirty." Korvac produced a hollow projector and flicked it on, displaying a rotating schematic. Vincent squinted at the rotating helix, recognition dawning. "I've seen this before," he said slowly. "During the Frontier Wars, it's a human design." "Exactly," Korvac said. "And according to our intel, you're the only human alive who knows how to deploy it." Vincent leaned back, considering. The Frontier Wars had been a dark chapter, even by his standards. Black ops, dirty bombs, civilian casualties, the stuff of nightmares. He'd gotten out, but the memories still haunted him. "It won't be cheap," he said finally. 10 million credits, half up front." Korvac sputtered, his gills flapping. "That's outrageous!" "That's the price for my expertise and willingness to get my hands dirty," Vincent said, standing up. "Take it or leave it." Korvac glared but tapped a few commands on his wrist comp. "Fine, the credits are yours, but we need to hurry, the Zorgons." A bone-shaking boom cut him off as the building shuddered, showering them with dust and debris. Alarms blared, nearly drowning out the panicked screams outside. Vincent checked his rifle and grinned. "Looks like they're early to the party." He tossed the gun aside. "I'll need something bigger than this pea-shooter. Let's go shopping." Vincent and Korvac sprinted through the war-torn streets, dodging rubble and craters as they raced towards the Yadaran military headquarters. The building was a hive of activity, with soldiers and technicians rushing to and fro, their faces grim with determination. Admiral Zelok was waiting for them in the command center, his tentacles coiled tightly in stress. "The Zorgon fleet is almost upon us," he said, gesturing to the holographic display. "They'll be within striking distance in a matter of hours." Vincent stepped forward, his eyes hard. "Then we need to hit them now before they can land their troops. If we can take out their flagship, the rest of the fleet will be thrown into disarray." Zelok and Korvac exchanged skeptical glances. "Our fleet is already outmatched," Korvac argued. "We can't afford to leave the planet undefended." "If we don't act now, there won't be a planet left to defend," Vincent countered. "I have a plan. We jury-rig the bioweapon to your torpedo stockpile and launch a preemptive strike. Cut off the head, and the body will flounder." Zelok hesitated, his eye stalks twitching as he weighed the options. Finally he nodded. "Very well. We'll assemble the fleet at the northern pole, out of sight of the Zorgons, but we must hurry." As Yadaran engineers scrambled to modify the torpedoes under Vincent's guidance, a second alarm blared through the command center. "Admiral!" a technician shouted. "A cloaked Zorgon force has landed near the capital. They're slaughtering civilians." Korvac's comm unit crackled to life, a panicked voice filling the air. Korvac, the Zorgons are here, they're... The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only static. Korvac's eyes widened in horror. That was my mate. I have to go. I have to save them. Zelok shook his head. I need every warrior for the coming battle. We cannot spare anyone. Vincent stepped forward, surprising himself with his next words. I'll go. I'll get Korvac's family out while he leads the fleet. Korvac stared at him, gratitude and disbelief warring on his face. Vincent unclasped his dog tags and pressed them into Korvac's palm. Hold on to these for me. I'll be back to claim them. With a solemn nod, Korvac turned to follow Zelok to the assembling fleet. Vincent watched him go, then turned and sprinted towards the waiting dropship. He checked his weapons as the craft lifted off, the city sprawling beneath them. Smoke rose from a dozen points, the distant sound of screams and gunfire reaching even this height. Vincent gritted his teeth as the dropship hurtled towards the besieged capital. He was gearing up for one of the deadliest missions of his career, but he found he didn't mind. Somewhere along the way, this had become more than just another job. This time, it was personal. The dropship banked hard as it approached the landing zone, anti-aircraft fire streaking past the viewports. Vincent braced himself as the craft touched down hard, the ramp already lowering. He could see Zorgon shock troops in the distance, their cruel blades glinting in the firelight as they chased down fleeing civilians. Vincent charged down the ramp, his rifle already barking in his hands. He had a family to save, and God help any Zorgon that got in his way. The dropship shuddered as another blast rocked its hull, the smell of burning insulation filling the cabin. Vincent gripped the support strap tighter, his eyes locked on the hellscape below. The once thriving Yadaran city was now a war zone, its streets choked with rubble and corpses. "There!" Vincent shouted, pointing at a Zorgon landing craft disgorging troops onto the ruined boulevard. "Light 'em up!" The pilot grinned savagely, bringing the nose-mounted cannons to bear. The guns roared, spitting a hail of high-explosive rounds that tore into the Zorgon ranks. Armor shattered, and bodies burst as the rounds found their marks, the survivors scattering in disarray. Vincent didn't wait for the dropship to land, leaping from the open hatch as soon as they were low enough. He hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. His rifle was already in his hands as he came up scanning for targets. The streets were a maze of collapsed buildings and burning vehicles, the air thick with smoke and the stench of death. Vincent moved quickly, following the tracking signal from Korvac's mate's comm unit. He encountered pockets of Zorgon resistance along the way, but his rifle made short work of them. The aliens fell before him, their blood mingling with the rubble. As he neared Korvac's dwelling, the resistance intensified. Zorgon soldiers seemed to be crawling out of every shadow, their cruel blades thirsting for blood. Vincent fought like a man possessed, his rifle barking until its magazine ran dry. He switched to his sidearm without missing a beat, the heavy pistol bucking in his grip as it spat lead. Finally he reached the dwelling, or what was left of it. The structure had collapsed, its entrance blocked by a mound of twisted metal and shattered stone. Vincent cursed, holstering his pistol and reaching for his demo charges. Suddenly a weight slammed into him from behind, sending him sprawling. Vincent rolled, coming up in a crouch to face his attacker. It was a Zorgon warrior, its mottled hide glistening with sweat and blood. The creature snarled, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth as it lunged again. They crashed together in a tangle of limbs, the Zorgon's claws scrabbling for purchase on Vincent's armor. Hot, fetid breath washed over Vincent's face as the creature snapped at his throat, its jaws inches from his flesh. Vincent strained against it, muscles screaming with effort. With a burst of desperate strength, Vincent managed to wedge his forearm under the Zorgon's chin, forcing its head back. His free hand scrabbled at his belt, fingers closing around the hilt of his combat knife. In one swift motion, he drew the blade and rammed it into the Zorgon's eye socket. The creature let out a shrill screech, convulsing as the knife pierced its brain. Hot, stinking blood gushed over Vincent's hand as he twisted the blade, making sure the thing was dead. Panting, Vincent shoved the corpse off him and staggered to his feet. From inside the ruined dwelling he could hear faint cries, cries for help. He rushed to the debris blocking the entrance and began to dig, heedless of the jagged metal that tore at his hands. It seemed to take an eternity, but finally he broke through. In the dusty gloom of the collapsed interior, he found Korvac's mate. She was badly injured, her blue blood pooling beneath her. But clutched to her chest was a tiny, mewling bundle, a Yadaran infant, miraculously unharmed. Vincent gathered them up as gently as he could, the infant's cries muffled against his chest. He carried them through the war-torn streets, seeking shelter. He found it in the form of a makeshift safe room where a handful of terrified Yadaran civilians huddled. Laying Korvac's mate down, Vincent did what he could for her wounds with the med-kit he carried. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He handed the infant to one of the other Yadarans, then keyed his comm. "Dropship. I need extraction at my location. I have civilians, one critically injured. How copy?" The pilot's voice crackled back, strained and tense. "Negative on extraction. LZ is too hot. Zorgon reinforcements pouring into the area. You'll have to find another way out." Vincent cursed, his fist slamming into the wall. He looked at the frightened faces around him, his jaw tightening. "Roger that. Tell the Admiral I'll be a little late to the party." He turned to the civilians, his voice low and urgent. "Barricade the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Yadaran forces. I'll clear a path for extraction." With that, he readied his weapons and stepped back out into the hellscape. The scene that greeted him was like something out of a nightmare. Zorgon troops filled the streets, pouring from landing crafts like a swarm of angry insects. At their head was a hulking brute of a Zorgon, its armor adorned with the grisly trophies of past kills. The Zorgon commander locked eyes with Vincent, its lipless mouth stretching into a cruel sneer. "Your death will be a warning to all who resist the Zorgon Empire," it rasped, its voice like gravel in a meat grinder. "A sign of what happens to those who defy us." Vincent unslung his rifle, a grim smile touching his lips. But this was no ordinary rifle. It was a prototype, a product of human ingenuity and Zorgon arrogance. Reverse-engineered from captured Zorgon tech by the brightest minds Earth had to offer, it was a plasma weapon of unparalleled destructive power. "Funny," Vincent said, leveling the rifle at the commander. "I was about to say the same thing to you." He pulled the trigger and the world turned white. A bolt of superheated plasma leapt from the rifle's muzzle, crossing the distance to the Zorgon commander in a heartbeat. It struck the alien dead center, burning through armor, flesh and bone like they were paper. The commander died instantly, its body crumpling like a marionette with its strings cut. But Vincent wasn't done. He turned the plasma rifle on the other Zorgons, hosing them down with a barrage of star-hot death. They screamed as they burned, their weapons clattering to the ground from nerveless fingers. In a matter of seconds it was over. The street was transformed into a charnel house, littered with the smoking corpses of Zorgon soldiers. Vincent lowered the rifle, its barrel glowing cherry red. The stench of cooked meat hung heavy in the air. He knew this was just the beginning. There would be more Zorgons, more battles, more death. But for now he had a job to do. He had to get these civilians to safety. He had to rejoin Korvac and the Yadaran fleet. And most of all, he had to make sure that the Zorgons paid for every inch of ground with blood. With a final glance at the carnage he'd wrought, Vincent turned and strode back towards the safe house, his boots crunching on the rubble. He had a war to win. In the cold void of space, Korvac's ragtag fleet hurtled towards the Zorgon Armada, a motley collection of torpedo frigates escorted by swarms of Yadaran fighters. Korvac stood on the bridge of his flagship, his hands gripping the command console as he watched the enemy ships grow larger on the view screen. Suddenly space lit up with a dazzling web of crisscrossing energy beams as the Zorgon ships opened fire. The void became a maelstrom of destruction, Yadaran fighters bursting like fireworks as they were hit. Korvac's flagship shuddered as a beam grazed its shields, alarms blaring on the bridge. "Hold formation," Korvac barked, his eyes never leaving the screen. "We're almost in range." The Yadaran ships pushed forward, closing the distance even as their numbers dwindled. Finally they reached optimal firing position. Korvac slammed his fist on the console. "Launch torpedoes! All ships, fire at will!" A swarm of torpedoes erupted from the Yadaran frigates, streaking towards the Zorgon fleet. The enemy's point defense cannons flared to life, filling space with a hail of interceptor rounds. Many of the torpedoes were blown out of the void, but a handful managed to slip through. They struck the Zorgon flagship, a monstrous dreadnought that dwarfed the other ships. Its shields flared, then failed as the bioweapon-laden warheads detonated against its hull. Geysers of corrosive fluid sprayed into space, the bioweapon eating through the ship's armor like acid through paper. Secondary explosions blossomed along the flagship's length as the corrosion reached critical systems. Escape pods blasted from the dying ship as it began to break apart, bodies tumbling from gaping holes in the hull. Korvac watched grimly, his face bathed in the flickering light of the explosions. "Fire again," he ordered. "Leave no survivors." The Yadaran ships unleashed another barrage, the torpedoes ripping into the crippled flagship. It shattered under the onslaught, fragments spinning off into the void. With their command ship destroyed, the Zorgon fleet fell into chaos. Some ships turned to flee, while others fought on stubbornly. Korvac pressed the attack, directing his ships to pick off the disorganized Zorgons one by one. On the planet's surface, Vincent fought his way back to the evacuation point, Zorgon soldiers now fleeing in disarray as news of their fleet's destruction spread. The night sky glowed with the flames of burning ships as dropships ferried Yadaran survivors to safety. At the evacuation site, Vincent found Korvac's mate and child among the wounded, barely clinging to life. A Yadaran medic pulled him aside, his face grave. "They need better medical facilities than we have here," the medic said. "A hospital ship at the very least." Vincent nodded, already moving. He scooped up Korvac's family, carrying them to the nearest dropship. "Get them to the Mercy's Embrace in orbit," he told the pilot, "fast as this bucket can fly." As the dropship lifted off, a battered Yadaran fighter landed in the rubble nearby. Korvac emerged, his face haggard but triumphant. He still clutched Vincent's dog tags in one hand. "It's over," he said, his voice hoarse. "The Zorgon fleet is nothing but scrap metal we've won." Vincent looked to the dropship rising into the sky, then back at Korvac. He managed a weary nod. "Your mate and kid are on that ship. They're hurt bad, but they'll make it." Emotion overcame Korvac's usual stoic demeanor. He grasped Vincent's hand, his grip fierce. "I am in your debt, human. We all are. We owe you everything." Vincent shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "You trusted me. That's more than most ever have." Korvac pressed the dog tags back into Vincent's hand. "And what will you do now?" Vincent looked up at the stars, his eyes hardening. The Zorgons had been beaten here, but their empire still stretched across the galaxy, a cancer waiting to metastasize again. "As long as the Zorgons threaten the innocent, my work's not done," he said. "I'm going to need a ship and a crew." Weeks had passed since the climactic battle that saw the Zorgon fleet reduced to smoldering wreckage. Vincent stood on the bridge of his sleek new warship, a gift from Admiral Zelok in recognition of his pivotal role in the Yadaran victory. The ship hummed with power, its gleaming hull bristling with the latest in human and Yadaran weaponry. The hiss of the bridge doors announced Korvac's arrival. The Yadaran warrior strode in, his bearing proud but his eyes shadowed. He held out a datapad to Vincent. "The final casualty reports," Korvac said, his voice heavy. "Over 1 million of my people dead." Vincent took the datapad, his jaw tightening as he scanned the grim figures. His eyes caught on a familiar name, and his breath hitched. He looked up at Korvac, sympathy etched on his face. "Your mate. I'm so sorry, Korvac. She fought bravely." Korvac nodded, his gills fluttering as he controlled his emotion. "She knew the risks, we all did, but thanks to you she died free. We would all be dead or enslaved if not for you, Vincent." Vincent dipped his head in acknowledgement, then turned to the holographic star map floating above the command console. He zoomed in on a distant system, pulsing red. "Intel suggests the Zorgons are regrouping here," he said, pointing. If we hit them now, keep them off balance, we might be able to push them back. End this war for good. Korvac studied the map, his brow furrowed. After a long moment, he shook his head. I can't go with you, Vincent. My people need me here to rebuild and recover. We're not warriors like you humans. We won't survive another war. Vincent sighed, disappointment warring with understanding. He reached out, clasping Korvac's shoulder. You're a good leader, Korvac. Your people are lucky to have you. Just then, a warning klaxon blared through the bridge. The holographic display shifted, showing a lone Zorgon fighter dropping out of hyperspace, heading straight for the Yadaran homeworld. Zorgon ship detected, the tactical officer shouted. It's heading right for us. Korvac's eyes narrowed. Destroy it, he ordered. We can't risk... Wait, Vincent cut in, holding up a hand. Something's not right. As if on cue, the comm crackled to life. A flickering hologram appeared, revealing a battle-scarred Zorgon. One of his eye stalks was missing, and his carapace was crisscrossed with old wounds. I am Commander Zell of the Zorgon Rebellion, the alien rasped. I seek the one called Vincent Grant. Vincent stepped forward, his hand resting on his sidearm. I'm Vincent, what do you want? Zale's lipless mouth stretched in what might have been a smile, revealing jagged fangs. To forge an alliance. Many of us Zorgons oppose the Emperor's tyranny. We wish to overthrow him and restore honor to our people, but we cannot do it alone. He leaned forward, his remaining eye stalk focusing on Vincent. We need your strength, human. Help us, and together we will topple an empire. Vincent glanced at Korvac, seeing the same mix of hope and trepidation in the Yadaran's eyes. The weight of the galaxy's fate seemed to press down on them in that moment. Vincent turned back to Zell's flickering image, his voice grim but resolute. Here we go again. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.